dead.
Yeah, you're in charge of it. Yeah, you're in charge of seeing where the team is going. And this is
All right. Anyway, I was introducing Judy, who is the Empress of SRAD, and I think we started in '78, the first meeting. And the book Beyond Formal Operations came out of that, and that has about 3,000 reads, so it's a pretty popular book. It sold better than any other book of mine.
Of its kind, yeah.
Yeah. And it's very influential. And it's wrong. Which is good.
So, should I introduce myself, or did you want to?
No, I'm going to introduce.
Okay. Okay.
And Sharon Stein went to the Graduate School of Education, but she also studied in the psych department. And I'm going to do this out of order because I'm dyslexic and I like doing things the way they appear to me, not the way they're historically accurate. Sharon was in the developmental section of human development, isn't that what it's called, Patty? Of the Graduate School of Education. And
At Harvard.
At Harvard. And what's interesting about that place is that it was cross-cultural. It also had the Sesame Street people in it. And it had moral development, and it had social perspective taking with Bob Selman and later Robert Keegan. And I would say that when we were there, it was really a very vibrant place. It's still vibrant, but more into educational technology. And the technology, of course, is old. And I don't think that was, it surely wasn't true with Robert Selman. He was cutting edge pretty much his whole life. And there were people like Torbett. Remember Torbett? He was on an outlier. Mm. And Susan Cook-Gruder is one of the founders of, what's that movement called?
What's the Susan Cook-Gruder?
Yeah.
Founder of...
You know, that whole branch, the Wilburians.
The Wilbur people.
Right.
Integral.
Integral.
Okay.
And a lot of the papers here, given here, well, Integral Review has become a much less integral psychology journal.
Wasn't Kurt was that Harvard?
Fisher.
Oh,
Fisher.
Kurt Fisher, yes. And
Not the first year or two, though.
no, not when Sharon and I started.
No,
out.
yeah, right.
Well, I have a story about him, if you want me to tell
Yes,
it.
I do.
Okay. So when I did so I was there in 1987 to 93. I took the long route to get the doctorate.
Me too.
But Bob Keegan and Kurt Fisher were both on my committee to decide the dissertation. You had to do a dissertation proposal, and that had to get approved. Well, Kurt Fisher believed that stages were, you move through stages of development not all at once, not like the whole self. It was piece by piece or task by task. Keegan believed that the whole self. So I wrote my paper, my proposal based on my thesis advisor's concepts, which were that it was total well, it got rejected. It got rejected twice, and I had to go and get the two of them to talk to each other about stage and say, can you let my dissertation proposal through, because I can't fix this problem that you two are having. And they did end up letting it go through, but it was a political nightmare at the time.
Everybody I know has had a fight at Harvard. Everybody I know.
Really? With Kurt or with other people?
With anybody. I mean,
I never
Susan
had.
had a terrible.
Who?
Suzanne had a terrible fight.
Suzanne Cook-Gruder.
Suzanne had a terrible.
Oh,
fight.
yes, well, but
Right.
Suzanne was a student of mine. What happened is I was a postdoc at the ed school, and Rick Richardson and I basically all of my work, though, I was thinking about it the other day, was done at Northern Michigan University. And when I got to Harvard, I found out how to make it right. But the ideas of stage and the post-formal stages I came up with, I remember, in Pierce Hall, which was on the second floor, lecturing to the adolescent class on formal stage. And it was the plant problem of Deanna Coons, who was a professor at the ed school at that time. And that's why I ended up at Harvard, was because of her. She brought me. And then I had my birds with me. So my birds had to go into Herrnstein's lab. And so my whole path, but I already knew of Larry Kohlberg, because even when I was at Northern, I always taught Kohlberg. And I always was an activist. But anyway, Sharon had many mentors, and her discussion today will reflect the breadth, just like you and I have breadth. One of the things about adult development that's unusual, positive adult development, is it's a very meta-systematic, paradigmatic, integrative enterprise. And if you go to ABBA or you go to SRAD, they're all very polarized.
SRCD.
Yes,
Yeah.
SRCD is very polarized, and it's very, it's more like a cult. And I don't think SRAD has ever fallen into that. We even allow the Wilburites in, which we don't generally agree with. I mean, but Wilbur credits me for the theory behind his theory. And Suzanne Kripgruder and I worked together for about 3 or 4 years. And if you look at her stages of Lovinger, they're really the model of hierarchical complexity until after the metasystematic stage, and then she becomes, what would you call it, spiritual.
Wilberian.
Wilberian, yes. And
Ken Wilber?
yes.
Oh, okay. All right. So anyway, I'm ready to get going. If you're ready. to
Well,
let me
we're
go.
not done.
Okay.
We have a lot of time, and I want
have a lot to say.
These are all students, and they don't know anything about this. Okay, and it's important to. I mean, I'm not going to live forever, and this is getting taped, and I would like it to be clear.
Okay.
All right, now, so she took a course from Herrnstein, and hold up his book.
The Matching Law.
And it's really a magnificent book, and it's how do you say, after his death.
What is it?
Posthumously
posthumously
published. Posthumously published.
By Howard
The
Racklin, one of the
Matching Law.
founders of behavioral economics.
And most people at the ed school would never take a course with Richard Herrnstein.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
It'd be awful.
No,
Yeah.
he was in psychology, and they didn't see that was relevant.
Ah.
I think
But
that's
Kohlberg
the
and
point.
he knew each other
that
very
Michael was
well.
making.
And Jacob Quartz and I was Kohlberg's best friend. We tried to keep him alive and failed. All right,
All right.
now I want you to introduce yourself. Did I introduce you well
Yeah.
enough? And Judy and I have worked forever together after she moved to Field. And we've
Great.
shared, 8
A
students?
lot of students, yeah.
A lot. Most of the doctoral students really are jointly with her, but I've had a lot of them, and they've stuck. That's what's interesting is our influence has stuck, and they've gone on and stayed in the field and continued doing research. Patty?
So I'm Patrice Miller. I also got my degree at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and Human Development. I started earlier than Sharon and was there longer. Well, I finished before you, but I was there longer. And my primary interests are really in attachment and social emotional development.
So if you want to go to Harvard, don't plan on the fast track.
Yeah.
That's probably true even today.
Go ahead.
I'm Nadia Ferdowsha. You can just call me Nadia. I'm a doctoral student at Oklahoma State University. Originally from Indonesia. Just trying to see what you guys have going on here, because like most in my program are like in child development, and I'm
Right.
the outlier there.
Because
So-
you're an adult.
Yeah.
Yes.
Join the crew.
Yes. So.
I mean, why do you think it's called SRAD, not SRCD? Because we are really interested from adolescence on.
Yeah, and I think that's really,
So you may have found your flock.
yes, absolutely. I'm just glad I found, this.
And you're welcome. We
Yes.
we don't have any factions. There's and we subscribe. I mean, we've had aging people in this group. We've had Judy is going to talk about Judy's
Death.
tomorrow.
I'm going to talk about death. I'm sure you're all
Yeah, so that's the end of
very
life.
excited.
Yeah, and so we're there, and I think we have respect for all the major leaders in adult development. Kohlberg, Keegan, Selman, Erickson, and we surely take parts of Freud seriously. Not all of it. It's too magical. Some of it. It is.
Yes, I agree.
But we surely respect it. We have had one or two psychiatrists in this group, but mainly psychologists, counselors, organizational psych people. What am I leaving
Educators
out?
and
Education,
professors.
a lot of education people. So we're much broader than most groups, but we're practical. I would say that what's different about us, and we do publish a lot.
Well, and I think it's important to say that this is an international group.
Yes,
So there's a European branch
Oh, okay.
that
it's
is
bigger.
very
It's,
active.
it's about
Great.
4 times the size
It's
of us.
quite large.
And I could even tell you why.
They
Okay.
meet on the alternate years. So
We meet on the alternate.
next year.
It's
there
Europe.
will be an adult development meeting in Europe. So
Where?
if you look up ESRAD, you will find
And you'll see our symbols are the same.
it would be great to have you go there.
Where's it going to be?
We don't know yet.
Okay.
I know, but I can't remember.
I'll ask Eva.
Let's move on.
Okay, great.
Anyway, and what is your particular interest in adult development?
Right now, we're focusing on the centenarian, so the all the
Oh,
Those
okay.
are who are 100 or above.
100 and plus.
Okay.
Very
Interesting.
interesting.
Yeah, fantastic.
Come on, you're Craig.
Yep.
I'm Craig, I'm her husband. Really, I'm just here because after 20 years I thought I could maybe find out what she does for a living.
All right. Next.
Come on.
I'll go.
No, your sister first. She.
I'm Rosie. I'm my sister.
Honey, I'm deaf, so
You have to speak
talk
up.
to me.
My name is Rosie. I'm my little sister. I'm here with her. I follow her everywhere.
She's a high
She's
school
my
student.
Oh,
Okay.
fabulous.
Yes.
Welcome.
Here,
Welcome.
her first time out of Vietnam.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Fantastic.
And your sister?
Hi, I'm Miley.
Give your last name.
It's very difficult to pronounce. It's Zul. Miley Zul.
I go to Colorado University. I'm a junior. I worked with Michael and Patty last summer. And
You have to talk about the Vietnamese orphanage.
yes, so 2015, 2016, 2017, I worked with Robert Miller, which is also a part, he also is a part of their association, and we investigated or did a research in this orphanage in the town that I was from, Haiphong, Vietnam, and it's a single study on the adolescent and graduate group of this government-run orphanage. So we looked into their attachment, we looked into their well-being, and we looked into the effect of institutionalization on them, and we tried to target it with the financial support that there has been helping this institution.
Great. Thanks.
You're next.
I'm Kiana. I'm going into my senior year at Boston University, and I'm interested.
Louder.
I'm Kiana.
I gotta get women to speak up. Women need to speak louder.
Yep.
That's true. First of all, we
Speak from
care
your
what you're
diaphragm.
saying.
Okay.
I'm Kiana. Going into my senior year at Boston University, and I'm interested in cognitive and developmental psych.
Hi, my name is Mansi Shah, and I have been working with Dr. Common since almost 2 years now. My research areas are more of the adult development and cognitive psych, experimental psych. I've done my master's in clinical psych from Long Island University, and I'm trying to get more research experience, and then later on maybe look into a PhD graduate program.
Great.
So hi everyone, my name is Arati.
What's your last name?
Raghuvamshi. So I'm also working with Michael. I did my undergraduate degree from Boston College in psychology. And right now with Michael, I am working on non-literate populations in Nepal and studying their understanding of the laundry instrument, which focuses on the model of hierarchical complexity. And my own research interest, maybe later on for grad school, would be stress and trauma in development.
Okay.
So I'm hoping to find grad programs in that area.
But she's also working, a lot of us are working on personality disorders.
Great.
From vastly, very many perspectives. And Artie is, in Nepal, we're studying whether how people justify their solving of problems, and whether their multiple choice answers line up. And Sharon and I worked on a study, and we didn't have a big enough end. We found there was a correlation, but it wasn't perfect. And so we're looking, Piaget only did interviews, and Kurt Fisher has done both, but never at the same time. And I should mention Theo Dawson was member of this group. And Theo is... What?
Shutong.
Oh, Shutong, you're up hiding.
Yeah, I am.
You gotta stand up.
Wait, where's that? Anyway, hi, I'm Shutong Wei. I am working full-time with Michael Commons at there, and I got my master's in economics from Boston University, and my primary interest is behavioral economics.
Well, we're founding developmental behavioral economics. We're
Okay.
the founders of a new
Yes,
field.
and there's so much to be done in that field.
Yes.
Yes, I'm very excited
lot.
about that. So great.
So, but you were going to talk about discounting
we're gonna
and
talk
all
about-
that,
yes.
which is
Yep. So
all fits together.
yeah.
She needs to get going.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Sharon.
Well, thank you. So I just wanted to give you some logistics. Everybody knows where the bathrooms are, and then at 2:30 we'll take a break. But please feel free if there's something that you say, oh, can you tell me more about that? Or I have a question. Don't hesitate to just interrupt or raise your hand or whatever, I'm fine with stopping and starting and stopping and starting because I want to go. I don't know what you all are interested in as far as the, some people might be interested in clinical details, some people want, the research or the economical theory. Anyway, so, okay. So as Michael already introduced, this kind of thing, I've been working with him since, was the late 80s.
Yes.
You helped me get into the Harvard Ed School by helping me get my qualifying paper written, and also I was a master's student that got accepted to the doctoral program. I also studied addiction with Howard Schaefer, behavioral psychology with Richard Hermstein, and then I did my clinical work at McLean Hospital and did an internship in cognitive behavioral psychology. And then eating disorders, gambling. I've been working with all of these types of behavioral problems.
Can you all hear?
Yes. Okay.
Keep going.
Okay. Okay, so you're clicking behind me as I go. Okay. So this is just an overview chart, and I'm sure you've all seen this, so I'm not going to go into details on I don't know if you can read it, but
No, you can't.
oh, you can't read it. So anyway, Piaget, Erikson, Kohlberg, Fowler, Westerholt, all these are people that have, when I was at the Harvard Ed School, there were so many stage theory people. So there was also Gilligan, she did the stages of care, there was Selman. Anyway, I'm not going to go into all the details on it, but pretty much Piaget is the founder, and we will get into
What, Patty?
Yeah.
Will these PowerPoints be available
Yes,
to people?
yes.
So
So
you'll
if
be
you
able to
can't
read
read
the chart in detail.
every
And this is pretty much covered in volume 1 of Beyond Formal Operations. This is
Yes.
just a slight variant of this table.
yeah. There is a better table that I can't make it go bigger, but anyway, so
The only persons left out is Fowler and the other person.
No,
on
Fowler's, in those
Right.
Beyond Formal.
What's the one on the far right?
Westerhoff.
Not
Westerhoff.
Westerhoff.
Yeah.
Oh, I have a comment.
Okay.
Your fight over the dissertation, I thought about that for a long time. And what I think is both people are right. Keegan is right. If you pay attention to the tasks are at a stage. But whether you can do those tasks depends on your training, and that's what we're showing in Nepal. So, for instance, the thatch roof problem is easier for them than the laundry problem, because they don't have any experience with doing laundries with washing machines and liquid or powdered soap, etc. So Kurt was right, but only in performance. So they're both right. And if you divide the world into tasks and to actions to do the task, you're going to get a complete picture, and it'll be consistent and right.
And as we get into the dialectical behavior therapy, what Marshall Linehan found was that many of the patients were able, like in their normal life, say they would be high-functioning people, say attorneys, but then when it came to a relationship issue, they would regress and not be able to solve. She was like, "What's wrong with you?
They never developed.
Well, they either never developed in that arena. So the question becomes stages of what part of self is trying to perform the task. So, and we'll get into are there multiple selves within one being, which is a question. I think.
No, I think you've answered it.
Well, anyway, okay. The Erikson. Can you flip to
No.
next? Oh, yeah.
That
Okay.
we can read.
Yeah,
Sure.
so you can read it a little better. What I like about Erikson is that there's you wouldn't believe how many people I have found are their initial issue is with attachment the first 0 to 18 months. So I will have a person I'm working with. I've been a clinician for, since 1985. And I will find people that are fairly capable, but then as soon as there's a problem with feeling rejected, they flip right down to trust versus mistrust, and they're feeling that they can't trust. And then they become, stopped in their tracks. They're not able to move. And so then you have to go back and do repair for that. But
Can I make a comment?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When we started on this project on personality disorders, I posited that really the central issue was attachment.
Yes.
In all the personality disorders, and that's the difference between the anxiety disorders and the personality disorders, is attachment is always central.
Yes, I definitely think that attachment, you can have, so like if you've studied people who've had trauma, say Edna Foa did her research on women who have survived rape, but most of her research was on women who hadn't had developmental problems, but they'd had a rape when they were, say, in their 20s, and then they had to do prolonged exposure therapy to recover from that. Those people recover much faster and more effectively than people who have had repeated trauma, say, from early childhood, compared to, and so Linehan's research is about, she used Foa's research. So, but she also did find that some people who weren't able to really move through her, therapy and kept having repeated relapses or going back to self-injury, that kind of thing, would had some early attachment issues. So the question is out. I mean, I think it's pretty clear. Borderline personality disorder is probably a 0 to 18 month trauma.
But so is psychopaths.
Yes, right. And it's the men tend to become more psychopathic, and the women tend to become more borderline, which is probably because of our
Do we have
the cultural.
sociopaths anymore?
No.
They're all psychopaths?
Yes.
That's too bad.
We're talking about the DSM-5.
Yeah.
I'll have to look at that again. I didn't realize.
No,
yes,
that's
it's psychopath.
true.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And by the way, the psychopathic scale is 5 factors, so it's
Can you
useless.
switch to Piaget the next one?
If you look at psychopaths, they basically have attachment and anger issues.
Mm-hmm.
And those are separate scales in our latest work, and then it accounts
A little
for.
too big, maybe, but
No. That's
Oh.
I'm trying to zoom in.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting. It didn't. Anyway, I thought this was interesting. Have you seen this? This slide is from a person who did research on the Monopoly game, of looking at playing Monopoly with your child and what happens. So you can see how there's this chunking happening where at concrete, the child understands basic instructions, plays by the rules, but it's not capable of hypothetical transactions. They can't really think ahead like, oh, I've got to save money or I've got to buy all the things on the board. But then by formal, the child is able to play the game with complex and hypothetical transactions. So this switch from concrete to formal is a big, in Michael's theory of abstract is in the middle between those two as far as being able to have a reflection on the concrete and then move to the formal. But that seems to be where most of the adolescent to adults that I'm working with are stuck, is that shift from the concrete, abstract, formal, to be able to reflect on how your behavior in the present moment is going to impact the future versus just trying to, deal with the present moment or how you're influenced by the past.
And I worked with a guy in political psychological development. What's Rosenberg?
Mm-hmm.
And you had a Rosenberg kind of student. What's his name? He's still around. He's one of those guys who publishes a lot. And what we found is the population politically is stuck in exactly those three stages, and it explains the elections.
Okay, so I would love to have a deeper discussion about this, and I mean, I do agree with you, but I've been uncomfortable with, because it's really important as a therapist that you not blame someone for being at a lower stage. You have to have non-judgmental, loving kindness.
Absolutely.
So I don't want to get into a polarized, well, you're less developed, so that's your problem. And that, but that
But
is.
come on, income is predicted 0.7 by stage. I mean, we can't avoid it.
I know, but
I think
it doesn't
it's
help the
also-
world.
It also helps if we start talking about earlier versus later rather than lower and higher.
Yes, yes.
Because there's some environments in which lower stages, earlier stages, are more adaptive.
Right.
For example,
Well,
if you
you're a
lived in the
farmer,
jungle.
if you're a farmer, you don't want to invent the wheel.
Right. Or if you live in the jungle, you want to be able to tell small differences between, fruit and animals and all those kinds of things and attend to concrete details.
But you also want to have a social group that's cohesive, which requires the abstract stage. All right, let's go on. I'm sorry. I'm going to interrupt because that was my plan. Don't.
Because you're an interrupter.
No, I just think this is a discussion and we're moving the whole field
I got it.
forward.
Yes, yes. Well, and just, I'm not going to go into, like I said, with each one. You can have a whole course on any one of these slides. So I'm doing the big picture overview, and then I'm going to tell you when wide angle, narrow angle lens. So we're just, again, the stage 3 to 4 and 4 to 5 are where most of the patients that I'm working with are. And the so some of the, I don't know if any of you have studied high conflict divorce, but this is another issue. I work with a lot of couples with high conflict divorces happening, and they're completely stuck in the what's right, reason to be good, and I should be a nice person, live up to the expectations of people I know and care about, others. But what they don't do is they can't hold in mind that there is no one reality. They think it's either I'm right or he's right. They're not.
Stage
they're not
3,
doing,
4.
Right. They're doing 3, 4. They're not. If I can get them to move to, there isn't really a right or wrong here. It's what's effective in the long run for your children. And can you hold in mind that it's actually you don't have to fight this spouse on this level. You can let go of the battle in order to get to the higher level of, yes.
Can you explain more about this high conflict divorce? Like where the problem comes from? Why is it high conflict?
Well, typically, and we'll get into stuff about personality disorders, but I often see two people with personality disorders having a divorce. And so typically I'll see people with, say, a narcissistic type personality disorder and a borderline personality disorder. And what happens is they become very entrenched in, I have to prove that this person is wrong in order to me feel good about myself. And so it becomes almost like a survival fight. And the children are caught in this,
Well, it's about 25% of the divorces. There's the drifting apart divorce, and then there's this brutal fight divorce.
But the sad thing is when people have money, they will spend thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars fighting one another when this money could go to their children in the long run. And you watch this happening, and the psychologists and the lawyers are making a lot of money off of the people that just have personality disorders.
Brad and Angie.
Yeah.
Who?
Brad and Angie, borderline and narcissism. He's the borderline.
You can
He has
go to
a
the next.
terrible alcohol problem, and she is a narcissist with anorexia.
Use their last names.
Brad Pitt and
Angela
Angelina
Jolie.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I mean, and you can, there's lots of examples of history we could look at too. I mean, you can look at, Clinton. I mean, President Clinton, he was a very high functioning, high stage person in many, many ways, but then this area of sexual activity became I think a drop in stage in terms of
from narcissism.
and
Narcissism, sexual addiction.
Yeah.
probably sexual addiction. Anyway,
And can we talk about the present? Present, he has all of them.
Malignant
Just check all the
narcissism
boxes.
and Alzheimer's.
Huh?
Malignant narcissism and Alzheimer's.
No, not Alzheimer's. He doesn't show that.
Well,
his
a lot of
vocabulary
people
has
disagree
dropped,
with
but
you.
not.
What?
His vocabulary has dropped, but not to the extent Alzheimer's patients. I've done Alzheimer's.
So
I mean, they're much worse off, and they deteriorate much faster.
Did you read the Lifton thing?
Yes. It just isn't
Anyway,
true.
guys,
well,
Okay,
so this is your baby here, so we can talk about the orders of hierarchical complexity, and what the way that I will summarize it from my perspective is that I'm looking at what is the task that this person needs to perform and what are their capabilities in being able to perform it. And then as a therapist, what I do is I try to assess where is the person blocked or stuck or having difficulty, and then assist them. So you haven't done much, have you, with social support for stages of a task? I would be very interested.
Well, Fisher spent years doing
okay.
it, and Fisher
Calls it
influence
scaffolding.
was a
Right,
very
scaffolding, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I wrote a couple of papers on it. It's in the stage transition paper, but I want to mention that all the previous theories except Erickson perfectly map onto this.
Okay.
And the only one, and if you divide the Kohlberg stages in, which he did, like 3/4, 2/3, if you divide them that way, they almost perfectly map, except for Gilligan's stage 4 or 5, which doesn't exist. And the paradigmatic stage, the first paper on it was Soner and I on society, and it has over 2,000 reads. It's very popular. But I had this. The whole Nepal study is about opportunity and support. What we do is we reinforce them doing the laundry, and we give them a lot of practice, and we give them a transfer task, and guess what? They move up. What would you expect? It's just like your therapy, except we use a very clear problem, not a fuzzy
problem.
Yeah. And for those who, the laundry problem is a concrete operational task problem that you have to learn how to have formal operational thinking in order to solve. Would you, or is it abstract? Would you call it?
No, I think it goes down to infancy.
Okay.
If you can recognize blue booster and pink liquid soap,
Okay.
you can do that at the circular sensory motor stage. So everything, and if you, so it goes all the way, and I just, who's working on the laundry? You are, Massey.
Yeah, we're extending it.
Yeah, we're doing it to
Okay,
the
so are you
paradigmatic
going-
stage.
Oh, you're going up to.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Interesting.
and,
Up and
well,
down.
and up and down. In the paradigmatic stage, which I'm going to talk about tomorrow, I'll give you the 1-minute summary. All the
Can you go to the
use
next
of Piaget is always categorical, logical thinking. But if you look at it probabilistically, you will, if you know a lot about math, not a little bit, you know that probability and logic do not map onto each other. Correlation is not the same as implication, and you've all learned that as undergraduates. And so they're two different metasystems. So probability and statistics is one branch of math, right? And logic And set theory is another branch, and they're different metasystems. And if you coordinate them, you're at the paradigmatic stage. Very simple. And we can measure using a version of the instrument to measure it without having to interview people.
Okay.
Okay, so what I'm doing in therapy when I'm sitting with people is I'm looking for where is this person's task or complexity. There are, I looked at this slide and I thought, oh, okay, there are a few of my clients that really are still back in the sensory motor, that those people are the ones who, I've got several that just, when they get triggered, they go into, I feel like I don't exist, or I'm not really here, or, you know, and you think about the infant who's been abandoned, who doesn't get the mirroring back. Well, when a person is in that level, that's even before pre-operational, that's
sensory motor.
Yeah.
And that's a stage. Go back one slide.
Okay.
Go back.
So go back.
Sensory motor is four.
Okay. Oh, yeah, so that'd be, yeah, so,
Sensory or motor.
No, it's not sensory or motor. It's sensory motor. And that's where rats and pigeons are.
okay, so level 4, okay.
Yeah. And they can't identify themselves in a mirror.
And these are pretty severe. I've had a couple of, especially adopted patients that are, when you don't get the kind of mirroring or attachment that you need when you are initially born and you're left in an orphanage, say, with no one there to give you mirroring or support.
Pay attention.
That is when there's this sense of, I'm not real, I don't exist, I may not be here, and then the person will move back and forth in dissociation. And so I've got one client who's, she's graduated from, she has her bachelor's in psychology from the U of M, but she's
University of Minnesota.
But anyway, she's, when she gets triggered, she goes back to this state of literally saying, I feel like I'm not here right now and I don't know if I can stay alive. And then, of course, she has attempts to cut herself, and it's a way of trying to bring her body back into
alive.
Prove that she's alive, to feel like she's, so we're
I'm going to interrupt again. In Vietnam, when we're studying the orphanages,
I
the
Yeah, I know.
the orphanage
The
people.
Michael really needs to make a little bit more progress.
Yeah.
I don't worry about, please.
We can't do all the topics right now.
I am going to do this. I'm going to. Just don't fight me on
You're talking all day tomorrow.
it. No, I'm not talking about any of this stuff. In Vietnam, we find out that the orphanage people have real trouble forming relationships after they leave the orphanage. And we're going to add these questions she just raised. Okay? And they also have trouble at work because they don't see themselves as being a productive member of society. They deny they exist in some sense.
So we're going back to the color.
Well, and no, go to the next one after that now. Okay. So my thesis advisor was Robert Keegan. And what the piece that I think Wilbur also used, because I saw that Ken Wilbur did, I've read some of his stuff that he actually cites Keegan on this issue, which is Keegan talks about, the underlying structure of meaning making, you go from a single point to categories, to cross categories, to systematic, to system of systems. And that's different, it's using different terms than what your...
No, it's system of systems is metasystematic.
Okay, but...
It's all there.
It's all there.
And he cites me in that book.
Oh, okay, yep. So one's reflexes are what you can see then as object. I don't know if any of you remember I remember I have twin boys, and when they were probably 1 year old, we would just sit and pretend to sneeze, and we would do, chew, and they would just laugh and laugh and laugh, and we thought it was the funniest thing. Well, it's because they were becoming, their impulses and perceptions became objects, so that's why it was funny then. It's not funny anymore because, it's like kind of like boring. but every time you're at a new level where this new thing is becoming, you're becoming aware of it, it becomes very interesting as you move from what you're subject to what you can see as an object.
You're reflecting on it.
You're reflecting on it, yes. So
and that's
anyway.
straight from Piaget, in Elder and Piaget.
Yeah, and I'm citing Keegan because he was the one, I studied
Learned
most
it
with him
from
and I
him,
learned
but
it from
it's
him.
in
But
Piaget.
yeah, so
In
go to
Elder
the
and
next one.
Piaget.
And I
There's
talk
no better person to get you organized than a 7-year-old.
right.
A 7-year-old will go through your shelves, your closet, your drawers.
Yes, and they're very concrete,
And they're
so that
very
they
good.
can put things in categories and they can get them straightened out. But so the way that Keegan taught me about this subject-object thing is there's what you know, what you know you don't know, and
That's why you can go to school.
what you don't know that you don't know is what gets you stuck. And so that's where, like, the alcoholic or the person who's doing repeated patterns of behavior that are in the long
addiction.
run. The addiction is
All of them, including gambling.
They talk about denial is not a river in Egypt. Denial is a experience of you're subject to it. Everyone else around you can see it, but you can't see it. So then you have to have a painful awareness of becoming aware of what it is that you don't know about yourself.
So in this way of thinking about it, you cannot go, can you go in and out of denial? Is that a transition stage or something?
I believe that, and I'll get to what DBT does. DBT does where you do a chain analysis on the problem behavior, in which a detailed, excruciating chain analysis, like, what were you thinking, what were you feeling before you injured yourself, or before you picked up a drink, or before you did this negative self-harming behavior. And then you can be aware. I mean, I think in AA, it's also the same thing where they keep saying, okay, if you're not ready to stop drinking, just keep coming back. But AA is going to ruin your drinking. Mindfulness and awareness is going to make you not really be able to do it in the same way that you used to do it. And I do think it's hard to go back once you have an awareness of what your issue is.
But re-traumatization does.
Oh, right.
Sure.
Okay, so then, yeah, so that paradox, yes. So we've got behavior of an organism across time. The questions are continuous or discrete, and what DBT and what I believe you're saying too, Michael, is that it's both and. It's not. We think of it at continuous. Time is continuous, but it also can be chunked into discrete chunks of time. Stages assume a discrete barrier or chunking of learning into an objective awareness. So that's learning that you have an object to be acted upon. But what I like about Erickson is that the trauma is considered a lack of learning, a deficit or hole. And then, trauma, Erickson came out of Freud. So Freud talks about regression in service of the ego. So what happens, I believe, is that you have a person who's going along in time and doing their behaviors, whatever. Then they have something that triggers them right back to that early childhood trauma. And then they don't know how to solve it because they're back in that experience and they don't have the skills in that with the emotional and the
Cognitive.
well, the cognitive and the emotional, and probably even a flooding of the biological, like an adrenaline rush, or we'll talk some about brain. The brain response gives you an amygdala hijack. You've probably heard that term. Is then the person doesn't have the capability of solving it from their higher stage thinking.
Can I make a comment? Pasqualeone showed about in 1972 that the working memory gets attacked by trauma and Jesus Rosales shows in dogs they go down in stage non-reinforced trials. Just being wrong And not getting the reinforcer causes regression. And he says if you really want to get people to perform at their tip top, you don't want to have them miss very many things right. And that's one of the things that's completely left out of Skinner is shaping.
Right.
Has this wonderful effect that you don't make errors.
Right.
And it's never been written up in those terms.
Yeah.
So what I'm understanding is that we're following stage theory, and this kind of trauma happened in some stage earlier, right?
Right.
When somebody was a child, when somebody was, in the infancy stage, and they have problem, for example, with attachment in one stage. Are they still able to move forward into next stages if you say that this trauma was it so traumatic that it stopped them from moving from that stage?
So what it's sort of like yes and no. It's yes that they have. Linehan talks about the thing called apparent competence and active passivity. When you flip back and forth between these, so you might have an area in your life where you're really high functioning, and I will talk with people about it. Okay, let's get your lawyer self to talk about this kid problem that you're having with your child or with your spouse or whatever. So I try to get their one part of their brain to move to the other problem, but they have to have mindfulness and the ability to process the trauma before they can do it.
So you're talking about, as you mentioned before, the multiple self kind of
Yes.
problem, right? That
Right.
some part of themselves moves forward, but then some part just stick in the traumatized stage.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Think about somebody like Bill Clinton and how high functioning he was at times, and then how he also completely unable to imagine what was going to happen to him as a function of his sexual behavior. So.
Yeah, I mean, and they still, I don't want to, I don't know how, whether this is, please edit this piece out, but it's not talked about. This is a public trauma that is affecting our entire nation, and it needs to be processed. And the Clintons can't really talk about it. I saw Chelsea Clinton was asked the question publicly, and she was just like appalled that the person would ask it. This is public knowledge.
Right.
Anyway.
I'm going to say that it extended to Hillary Clinton. She
Right.
could not have intimate relationships at the point of really listening to people.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to answer your question, say, is not only is it domain specific, but it also floods. It also affects all the people around it. If you grew up with an alcoholic parent, there is no way for you to escape from it. Okay? It's not as if, everybody I know had an alcoholic parent is dramatically affected by it. And that's true. Half of her work has been on addiction of some sort or another, and it always affects everybody in the family.
But the flooding is that, like when we talk about the amygdala hijack, the brain, the higher order functioning of the brain literally goes offline. You're in survival mode.
The frontal lobes.
The frontal lobes. So you're just in amygdala and adrenaline surge, and then it's really hard. So anyway, I'll get to this stuff about lineage.
It floods the working memory.
Right.
The working memory disappears, and that's the way to concretize it.
So I was going to have a little video thing, but I couldn't get it to work. But anyway, if any of you seen the Harry Potter movies, there's this moment where Harry Potter suddenly realizes, I'm a wizard, I have capability. Well, that's this awareness of that you have more than you thought you knew to go to the positive piece of the next stage. But then there's also the opposite. Go to the next one. I am an alcoholic, I am such a loser, I am a child's plaything, Buzz Lightyear. Buzz Lightyear in that movie is literally having a narcissistic injury. He's having an episode where he thought he was this capable, hero in the galaxy, and he gets shrunk down to a child's plaything. Well, narcissistic injury can lead, so that's one thing you want to assess for with a patient, is it can even often lead to suicide because the person feels so, they're so much smaller than they thought they were, and they feel like they're not worthy of being at all. And then that shifts to this, I should just be dead. And in the Toy Story movie, he goes through a whole depression phase, and then, Woody kind of buoys him up and helps him realize that actually being a child's plaything is not such a bad thing. You can be okay being that. Anyway, so movies depict all of these things, and so once you start seeing this stage shift, you will see it everywhere in movies. And
They're usually the shift from abstract to formal to systematic is what all coming-of-age stories are about.
yes, a lot, yeah. Okay, so next one is
And that's what Hamlet is about.
Right. Yes, Hamlet. Mm-hmm. But one of the problems, and I'll talk about positive versus negative reinforcement. So when a realization is paired with shame, instead of going and telling people and getting help and support, you feel that you have to hide, or you have to. So that's why people are at such risk when they're suddenly aware of a negative awareness about themselves. You've internalized often what a parent has said, such as, "You are stupid, don't you know any better?" The internalization of the parent becomes the defense against learning. So this is another big picture thing when you pull the Freud defenses in. Defenses are necessary for containment of the self, but also deter from healthy growth. So the regression in service of the ego is when you suddenly have a painful experience that enlightens you and causes you to grow, but the goal is you have to get through that without killing yourself or without completely shutting down your life. So those episodes are both opportunities for therapy, and they're also a time when it's a dangerous time where the person, you can lose your client.
Sharon, I have a question.
Yes.
So I feel like it's a broader issue than like a negative per se discovery. I feel like if you discover something that's kind of deviant from the norm, from your culture or wherever you're at, and that already becomes very overwhelming. Why do you think that's the issue? It's not necessarily negative.
That's why the suicide rate in China is so high.
No, that's
So much negative judgment.
And such oppression and punishment.
Well,
They have a much higher rate of punishment than, let's say, Denmark.
But also in the Asian culture, suicide is very much shamed upon. Like if you commit suicide, it's not like, people empathize with you. People look down on you if you commit suicide. So it's also like you are in a stage of you want to kill yourself, but then what will it look on your family? Kind of leeway that you cannot go through it. You're stuck in a lot of, shackles and burdens of yourself, but there's no way out as well in that culture.
well,
That would be true more in Vietnam than China.
no.
You don't think so?
The same.
What about
Really?
Japan, where suicide is
It is a very
considered?
paradoxical thing, so it's contingent on what you've done. So
Uh-huh.
if you've done nothing, then you just kill yourself out of depression or anything, then
Shame.
you might be shamed upon. But if you've done something that's unforgivable, then you might just kill yourself to redeem that.
well,
And then that would be more honorable.
so I want to say
Yeah,
something too
sometimes.
about
Korea,
the
too.
boundary. So in the U.S., there is a high emphasis on individuality, and people can sometimes just say, okay, I'm not going to worry about what other people think. I'm not going to care that much about what other people think. I think in other cultures that is not as
Harder.
allowed. It's much more difficult to
We agree
separate.
completely.
But what I do with the clients that I work with is try to talk about it. The term is called ego strength. Can you can you build up a sense of your, you know, in Linehan she calls it the wise mind, the larger sense of self, to be able to say, okay, I'm not going to completely agree with my culture on this, and I'm going to love myself even if I wouldn't be loved by the majority of people in my culture. And that I think it's a very difficult thing to do.
What
I don't know if
Larry-
that
what's-
answers what you're...
Yeah, but let me answer also. Larry Kohlberg, what he said, he was always presented with the paradox of a stage 5, or in my system, 13 person who doesn't act morally or breaks their own principles. And it's about, he said it's about ego strength. And there are, I think it has to do also with personality.
Well,
So people, if I'm very insensitive to what other people think of me.
Yeah.
But I also want to
I
add, the thing that
I
is
just
brilliant
don't care.
about Marshall Linehan's work is that at the moment of most vulnerability is if you have a good relationship with your therapist, that you can contact that therapist. That is one of the agreements that the therapist makes with the client, that if you need me, I will be there for you. And then, so if they're about to self-injure or kill themselves or whatever, and you get a phone call, you call and you do coaching, so that you are able to support that person in that moment of having a different perspective. And that is why her therapy is more effective, I think, than just traditional psychotherapy.
Well, a psychoanalysis, you're never supposed to do
Right,
that,
right.
and that's why they failed with personality
Yeah.
disorders, because everything is about the alliance.
Yeah,
And you can't have an alliance if you have an emergency and you're abandoned.
right, right.
You're going back to the original attachment disorder. You're reinstituting the attachment disorder. Availability.
So let me keep going, because I want to soldier on here. Let's go. Yeah, so behavioral theory, or we'll go back to that one, the behavioral theory one. Okay, so now I'm shifting into a different lens of behavioral theory. So we've talked about developmental and some of the stage development. So then I was also trained in behavioral theory, and DBT does use, its core foundation is behavioral theory, which makes it a little bit different from most psychotherapies. So I'm just going to throw these things out there. People know about the different behavior over time is driven by reinforcements. There's schedules of reinforcement. There's fixed and variable interval. Now, classical conditioning is the thing that is most common I've found in trauma. I'm sure it's, the Pavlovian conditioning, where it's the bell and the food are paired and the dogs salivate. Well, if you have, say, I had a person who had classical conditioning for pain. She has horrible chronic pain and she has PTSD. Well, we come to find out that one of the punishments that her family did when she was a child was that she had to sit and kneel on, stones on her feet, on her knees, and hold her hands up in the air, and that was one of the punishments. So whenever she had pain in her knees, she was back to I must be bad. So we had to kind of undo that conditioning for her to be able to work with her pain.
What is wrong with people?
I know. Isn't that? Yeah, you wonder how could somebody even come up with a punishment
Pinker
like that?
says that the biggest advance
Mm-hmm.
in this society has been the decrease of the use of punishment.
Right, and at least that punishment is the worst schedule for reinforcement. Positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement, unfortunately, are both and so people know the difference, right? That punishment is what you do afterwards because you think it's going to deter, but it doesn't really work, whereas negative is like if you're sitting in your car and you forget to put your seatbelt on, there's the bang, bang, ding, 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 and then, put my seatbelt on, and it will make it stop. So, but with these clients, you may have multiple conditioning that is classical conditioning for various traumatic events that have happened. So then the next one So then I'm going to talk about the matching law. This is Richard Herrnstein.
1970.
Here it is. The
Yeah.
matching law, time of delay.
Yeah, so he basically says in impulsiveness versus self-control, time is always of the essence. He calls self-control as, he has a chapter in this book, The Matching Law, on self-control as response strength. And this is the main problem with the shift from concrete, abstract, formal, is be able to look at the immediate reward versus the long-term reward. So timed temporal displacement of competing alternatives cause an immediate reinforcer. So whenever, you know, and I'll just go through the next slides that show more of this. If you've got, this has happened to me multiple times, is people, they get right out of treatment, say, and they go home. Well, one of the things that finally therapists have learned is, you know, if before you send a person home after a 28-day stay in Hazleton, say, or a drug addiction, you have to get rid of their house, make sure their house doesn't have all their
Knives.
stored either knives or
Guns.
their the tools that they use for using. You know, so I find out that people have, oh yeah, I've got my stash up in a, they'll have like stash in the ceiling tile of their apartment or whatever. So they go
Right.
home, they're back there, they're alone, and there it is, and it's like time delay is no longer there because, you know, it's right there in front of you, you know, and the person relapses. Well, that's because of the matching law in that they've already been reinforced. Yeah.
I think it's one of a very important notion in AA too, that if you stop drinking and you don't improve your life, then you better not stop drinking at all. You
Right.
have to continue, you have to enter sobriety and improving your life at the same time. If you go back to the environment you were, the highest chance is that you're just going to fall into the person you used to be before you come into treatment.
Right.
In criminology, they know that returning people to the environment is the major cause for reinstituting criminal behavior. It's been known since the 20s, I guess.
Okay, so anyway, that you can basically read this slide. So in '61 was when Richard Herrnstein published the influential paper called, I believe it was called The Law of Effect.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. And-
70 is the formal matching.
Oh, okay, okay. So the next slide, yep. So when you look at, so this graph is an incredibly powerful, robust graph that works in multiple situations. I mean, if more people knew about this graph, we could probably predict elections. Like, you wonder, why does it keep going back and forth between Democrat, Republican? Well, the matching law, it makes most sense. We've only got two parties.
And it's on a concurrent schedule.
Yeah.
And when the reinforcement rate, there's the alternative that's getting reinforced, and there's accumulation of non-reinforcement. So people feel powerless, and they feel if they just try the other key.
Yep. And so in order for a person to, so if you think about being a person at, say, concrete abstract stage, and they're going forward in time, they know that the overall reinforcement for, say, drinking, cutting, eating, overeating, any of these things that are addictive behaviors, as soon as that opportunity to get that reinforcement, say, you know, somebody, you know, pours you a drink at dinner, or you are virtually powerless to resist unless you can hold this whole equation in your head and be able to have that as an object. So what we're doing in therapy is teaching people how to understand, yes, you are going to be tempted. This time is going to come around when someone is going to ask you to drink. What are you going to do to prepare yourself? How are you going to cope ahead? How are you going to plan for this? And when that whole thing can be chunked into something that is an object, that's when I see people don't relapse as much.
Brilliant.
But they still do have regressive periods where, you know, I mean, if you're in a car accident, or your parent just dies, or boyfriend breaks up with you, you might be flooded so that you don't have the ability to act at your highest stage thinking, and then you're going to relapse again. So that's why AA says, one day at a time. Take it. They're basically holding time constant in order to be able to reflect on this issue.
But they don't. What they're missing that Linehan has is this predictive thing of the long term. And it was a student of Stein who actually did this work. She was at Baruch University. I forget. I know her now. I could
Ainsley
say.
did some of it too.
Yeah,
George
Ainsley did the original. There's a chain. It's in many of my papers on discounting, but this part we'll get back to.
Yeah. So
Okay.
let's go to the next slide. Divided self. So Stein did talk about in one of his papers that there seems to be two different parts of self. If you can think about, so this is, and I'm gonna get into the developmental theory, so I'll just keep going through here. So there's the part of the self that wants to abstain and another part that wants to drink. At the time that a drink is nearby in time, the self that B2 has more reinforcement effectiveness than B1. So that becomes just what we talked about, is holding time constant seems to be the way to get the long-term goal versus the short-term goal.
I was just at ABBA, and there was a paper showing that it's also true of distance, not just time, but distance. There's discounting across distance. If you're in the bar, you're in big trouble.
Okay, right, yes, and there is an AA saying that says, it's like, why do you keep going to the barber if you don't want a haircut? Well, why do you keep going to the bar if you don't want to pick up a drink? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, anyway, I'm saying that in many others, change of stage has to do with making what was subjective objective. So you start to get, I'll talk about Homer, because this, Stein also talks about this. I'm sailing near the island of the Sirens, and I will lose my ability to navigate my ship. I must tie myself to the mast to avoid crashing on the rocks when I sail through those islands. That is having the whole awareness that you're going to lose control and being able to take a plan to stop yourself. In DBT, it's called cope ahead of time. So I'll sit and rehearse with clients. Okay, you're going to go visit your parents. What happens every time you go visit your mom? You end up drinking. You end up having trouble. Let's plan ahead so that we can make sure that you're not going to have that same aggressive behavior with that environment. But the other thing I wanted to go to the next one, the Rat Park. So I don't know if people are familiar with this study, the Rat Park study. So it's important, it's not just in the organism, the ability, it's also in the environment. So Bruce Alexander wrote the Rat Park Chronicles, and basically he was in response to the people that we're looking at. They were just giving either water or morphine for rats, and they had nothing else to do, so they got totally high on morphine, and ended up some of them dying because they would rather use drugs than drink water because that there was no other choice. They were bored, right? But when they created Rat Park, they had other rats to play with and mate with. They had enjoyable activities. They had the morphine use. They kept the morphine drip in the Rat Park, but it was a few rats would probably use it once in a while. Maybe they had pain or something, but they wouldn't use it most of the time. The matching law is not about what is effective as far as reinforcement. It's about what choices do you have. So if you change environment, you will also change the probability that the person will make a healthier choice. So that's
or
why,
that the morphine is reinforcing. So the
right.
effectiveness of the morphine as a reinforcer varies depending on other
other
variables
reinforcers in the
One of the
environment.
things that's not studied in SQUAB, Society of Quantitative Analysis of Behavior, rarely is there more than two choices. And it shows in the three-choice problem, things dramatically shift.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, right, which is, I think, a downfall of that. So go to the next one then. Okay, so I hope you can read this somewhat, but this is, I'm trying to look at trauma and memory here. So we've got semantic memory, so you know what happened, what you did, episodic memory, but you can have a trauma, say you fall off your bicycle. You might have an emotional memory about the person might feel triggered seeing their bike, remembering the shame that they felt when they felt laughed at because of their bicycle, but yet you still know how to ride your bicycle. So explicit memory is more of what we can talk about and be able to talk about like a story. Implicit memory is emotional and procedural. Well, most early trauma is completely nonverbal. It's not, you're not able to put it in explicit terms. It's implicit. It's buried in emotion and procedural memory. So I had an example of a client who, when we did her behavioral change to understand why did she keep drinking, why did she keep relapsing, she talked about, I don't want to relapse, I don't want to drink. Well, when we went through her chain analysis, we found that she only drank between the hours of 5 p.m. and 8 p.m. at night. She never drank in the morning, and she never drank later than 8. Well, when we went back and I said, well, what is it about these hours of the day? She said, oh, that was the time when I was abused when I was a kid, because it was always after work and it was always, so she was being triggered at those specific hours, but it was implicit. She didn't know exactly why. So all we did to help her was taught her to go to AA during the, she always had a AA meeting between 5 and 8. She stopped drinking because of that. Yeah.
Can we know at what age she started drinking?
Well, she was a teenager, I believe. She didn't always drink throughout. And the thing about these trauma memories is they seem to be able to be buried for a time, and then they started bubbling up for whatever reason.
So is there any chance that when she was still abused, when she was a teenager, she was probably still in the family, right? And she associated that time frame with drinking because that's the time she started drinking as well. Is there a chance of that?
Yeah, absolutely. But she did have a period of time of not doing it. So we didn't actually trace back why, what triggered the memory or the. So implicit memories can get triggered by events too, and you don't know why. Mm-hmm. People will say to me, I don't know, suddenly I was triggered, I couldn't remember why. I had one client, he went and helped, he was in AA, went and helped a friend, and the friend was just crying and whatever, he got emotionally triggered. He then wanted to go and use right after that visit. Well, he didn't, but he got back to the therapy session with me, and he said, that friend triggered something that was a memory of when his sister was in terrible pain. She had polio when he was a child, and it was a memory of her pain that he couldn't help this friend and he couldn't help his sister, and so it got triggered. Luckily for him that he had enough ego strength to not actually use over it. But so what I'll do is that just every time something comes up, you do a chain on what does this remind you of? What does this make you remember?
And that's from CBT also.
Yeah,
I mean, that's one of the major principles that psychoanalysis always only used the history. It never asked people to figure out the chain.
Right.
So this is pretty much from like either Dan Siegel or the guy, Daniel Goleman, Emotional Intelligence. I mean, there's a lot of people now who are understanding that, and Bessel van der Kolk, trauma in the brain, the amygdala goes, basically takes over. The brain's emotional computer and alarm system takes over, and we go back into deep memory. the prefrontal cortex basically goes kind of offline. I don't know if anybody's seen the Daniel Siegel thing where it's like, this is the brain stem and the amygdala, and then this is the brain. Well, as soon as you have a hijack, it goes up like this. And
You can see this in EGGs.
yes, it's not.
This is completely understood.
So the
Completely what?
It's completely understood.
Uh-huh.
The evidence is overwhelming. I had one comment that you both brought up Van der Kolk, and what he also shows is you can't learn about the trauma blocks. You've said this, but I'm going to say the reason is the frontal lobes are deactivated, so you can't learn. So that's the big impediment to doing stage transition. You actually are not using your frontal lobes when you're acting out.
Right, and so what in Linehan has a whole section called distress tolerance. So it's when your brain isn't working, when you can't access your prefrontal cortex to be able to solve problems, you have to immediately just go to the thing that works, which is self-soothe or put the dive response, you put cold water on your face, you do some kind of physical activity or paced breathing. So she actually has an acronym called TIP, temperature, intense pressure, paced breathing, and paired relaxation. And so that is a skill that you train your clients to be like, okay, you're triggered, you're not able to think clearly, distress tolerance skills,
And that
go
comes
straight
from
to that.
Buddhism. That
Yes,
comes straight
yes.
out of Buddhism. And that's why mindfulness works.
Sure, Tom?
Yep, so go to the next one, yeah, okay. So then what I'm doing when I talk to people doing the intake interview is, where is their trauma? Is it early development? Is there trust versus mistrust? Is there autonomy versus shame and guilt? Is there a memory of abuse that is buried? Can the person trust? Is it birth trauma? So I just try to get at that to try to find where it is. And most people have multiple. I found that, I'm working with a woman now who has, she had a terrible trauma where she accidentally killed a person when she was driving, and it wasn't her fault, but she felt horrible trauma as a result of it. But someone could have survived that by saying it was an accident, it wasn't my fault, it was okay. She didn't. She went immediately to suicidal thoughts, and when you go back, she had a divorce, her parents divorced, and she had an early sexual abuse trauma, which all those three things impacted together to cause her to feel suicidal as a result of that, having had that accident and completely devastating her life.
Going back to tips for a minute.
Sure.
It was temperature.
I believe it's intense pressure.
Intense.
You can find it online, any of the DBT skills. Paced breathing, paired relaxation, where you do the relaxation and then you try to think about bringing your arousal level down.
But in mindfulness, there's a lot more. You can concentrate on a very peaceful scene.
Yep.
And image it, and that's probably the fastest because it's not physical.
Well, that is one of the distress tolerance skills to imaginal desensitization, where you just try to go to your whatever safe place or but some people I found can't do any internal thing. They have to do an external thing because they can't go inside. So then they have to do
Very good.
the tapping or some kind of something with the physical body. Anyway, so let's go to the next one then. Okay. So when you look at developmental, this is the brain development people, and see, nobody's put these pieces together that I know of, that they need to be more overlapping. But Daniel Siegel wrote The Developing Mind, and he talks about, he talks about the exact same things that we're talking about here. He says you can have very high functioning people who are very capable, but then when they get triggered, they seem to go to this part of the self that has been, Freud used to call it sequelae, or like portions of the brain that are kind of pushed together. He says that which fires together wires together. So you can have, the problem is that if the child is traumatized or has an attachment trauma, and they are shamed or they are isolated, the parent doesn't do repair work, but they basically have nobody to help process it, you basically just bury it. You bury it in the right brain, and it stays there, and it's part of that brain event. I mean, I don't know that, I'm curious if people have done much on the, like looking at a PET scan while a person is going into their trauma memory. But that would be very interesting to see. I mean, my guess it would be right brain, and it doesn't, what we know is it doesn't cross the corpus callosum very well. So
in women more so than men.
So you can't have a part of what therapy is saying, oh, this is your trauma. This is your trauma memory. Let's understand this. Let's make it objectified. Let's help you work on it. And then you are shifting from right brain to left brain, teaching them to have a narrative about their own trauma so they can understand, oh, I just got triggered. I have to use my distress tolerance skills. I have to take care of myself. Whereas their old memory was, I have to be ashamed and I have to isolate and maybe I should be dead because nobody loves me because I'm bad. And so the shift is to get where you teach them how to have a narrative in which they can do self-care and loving kindness. And then that brings up the mindfulness, using loving kindness versus judgment and shame. So, so high-functioning people can have triggering events, and they seem to just shift back into this early state. So in Linehan, did you go to the biosocial theory? Yeah, okay. So she's talking about the individual in an environmental and social context, and she does talk about people do seem to be pre-wired. There's probably a genetic component.
That's been shown now.
Yeah.
It's 1/3. 1/3 of the people who have the borderline gene become borderlines.
Become what?
They become borderlines when they're traumatized, when they have this early trauma. 1/3 remember the trauma and can tell you, yes, I'm adopted, I was isolated, I have attachment issues, and 1/3 are nuts.
But they become very reactive to things in
Can
the
we take a
environment.
break?
Why don't we do I'm almost to the very end of this group of slides. Can I go to the very end? Oh, okay. So anyway, the biosocial theory is that there's always an invalidating environment that is paired with this kind of person. But what happens is you've got this genetically sensitive kid, say, and then you've got a family, and the parents are like, why do we have to give such exception to this person? You know what? So you might be that, the petunia in the onion patch, or the one who seems different, the child who is more sensitive, and then you have a family that can be fairly functional, but they're invalidating to you. So then it becomes this context in which that kid continually gets blamed. Oh, this kid is the problem kid, this kid is the too sensitive kid. Why do they, so then you build that social environment that creates the borderline personality. And the beliefs in the individual become that the world is dangerous, not safe, people are abandoning me, and then they flip back and forth between this, please don't leave me, or then being angry of like, you disgust me, get away from me. So it's the come close, stay away kind of mixed message.
And you see that in adolescence all the time.
Yeah.
So let's just go to so then I was just going to throw out this free will paradox thing because I want to talk about that, and then I think we're done with, there's two more slides. Okay. So so Marshall Linehan comes out of behavioral context. She does not believe in free will. She believes that everything is caused. So that is one of the things. So when people will come into therapy, it's kind of a blessing to say, oh, you mean I'm not crazy? This all came about because of my personality and my environment, and my genes. The pieces all came together. So it kind of relieves people. But we also, the therapy is that you provide a context in which there's more support for the person to have a new environmental context in which to change and grow. So it's like, if you think of the present moment as this moment in time, and then the past is the conditioned, and then the moving forward in time is there's a richer environment in order to offer other solutions, other choices, other ways of behaving. So that's what we're doing in therapy, is trying to create enough support. So she has a lot of paradoxes, and a lot of it does come from Zen Buddhism. The therapist must believe that the client is doing the very best that she can at this moment, and she must also strive to do better. So she talks about the two wills, the small will and the big will. So the small will is in DBT is willfulness, and the big will is willingness. So when you're at that path, that point where it's like, I'm so upset, screw it, I don't care, I'm gonna go I'm gonna go drink, I'm gonna go cut myself, I'm gonna do something bad. The goal is to say, hold that person in that place, to be able to give them options so that they can make a more willing choice. So are you willing to call your therapist? Are you willing to ask for help? Are you willing to look at other choices in that moment, which will then get them out of that place? Okay, so then let's just, I think I've got an empty slide. Now to the last one. Okay. So what I'm going to do in the second half of the talk after the break is talk about what we do with the client in DBT. So there's the pieces of individual therapy that allows both acceptance of where you are and the opportunity for change. And the modules are mindfulness, interpersonal effectiveness, emotion regulation, and distress tolerance. So I'll talk about all these pieces in the next half.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I had one comment. I think that one of the big things of another failure of Skinner and radical behavioralism is they don't see that people construct their environments, and they, to your point, Nancy, they choose their environments. So if you live in a poor country, or you live in a corrupt country, you can go to another country, and that changes your life.
So there's lots of behavioral momentum.
Right. There is behavioral momentum.
Right, but I'm
Makes it
saying
hard to change
there are
your life.
ways in which people overcome it. I left Northern Michigan, I got fired, and I came to Harvard, saved my life. And I met you.
Yeah. Yes.
Right, let's pause here.